Hi there, Residing here, take 3. Look, I got the candles on. Okay, it's turning into evening time, and that means the video quality will be less good, but we will get there. I'm just looking at the image. In this video, I will talk about there are different types of aliens. There are the visitors, and then there are the residing aliens. That means the ones that are living in our reality field. And what has been mostly focused on the information on the internet from Richard Dolan and other UFO investigators and the ones that have been doing that type of work. I was just thinking about some names, but I can't remember. It doesn't matter. They have mainly focused on the visitors. And the visitors are, for instance, if you get, for instance, Alex Collier, he was lifted up into the craft, the Andromedans, some of them from Andromeda, but actually these Andromedans were more Sirians, but they were in the Andromedan system. And this is where it gets a little bit difficult because the races, they spread over different systems. And when I talk about a system, I'm talking about what we call a solar system. And that is typically a system are different types of energies that goes from the 3rd to the 6th density. And they revolve around a star. So the Sirius system, Sirius is a star. Or the Alcyone, or how it's pronounced, which is a star in the Pleiadian system. And that was actually mainly Sirian. So the whole kind of racial thing is not necessarily related to the star, but is more related to the race that originally came from that system. And some of the issues we have had, for instance, with the Sirius B, they came from that star that is now just a white dwarf because they literally imploded their own star, their own system, and hence because of their star, their sun, the Sirius Bs, they have no home system anymore. So that's why they're raiding out a lot of other systems and are particularly working with the Zeta Reticuli. As well as some of the negative reptilian races. And these are they are small, they actually look a little bit like the android greys, the Syrian bees. They have this kind of hood around them, they don't look very nice. And they are small, the white, typically the dress they're wearing is typically a white suit. And they can shapeshift, which is kind of using holographic mind control, where they can shift from looking from these little ugly creatures into a tall, blonde, Pleiadian, Nordic looking kind of beautiful, gorgeous prince, if that kind of serves their purpose. Anyways, that's running ahead of things here. But some of the residing races are the ones that are living in our reality field. And when I say reality field, I'm actually talking beyond our solar system. Your perception of the solar system is within what we call the 3rd dimension. And when we go into the reality field, that is when we incorporate the 4th density and 5th density and 6th density. And actually going up to sometimes 21, all depending on what kind of scheme. That's all the dimensions we're talking about. So a scheme is kind of a cosmic level, and cosmos is a Greek word. It just means the whole thing, and that goes beyond a universe. But that's typically what we understand as a universe, but a universe is not totally correct because that's what the scientists are able to see with their looking out, and they're only looking at it from a 3rd dimensional perspective. So they are not really seeing the full scope of our universe, and that goes with the understanding of dark matter and dark energy, which are 96% of our universe. And the first step behind the 3rd dimension is, as I explained in the previous video, the 4th, and then you go into the 5th and the 6th. And when you just got the 3rd density, that is what we could call a terrestrial. And then and this version we got here is really not how it's supposed to look. This is a very primitive version of it, based upon a lot of electromagnetic energy, which is so unnatural for all of the systems out there. That's why we can't see them, because we are functioning in a severely downside state, which only runs on electromagnetic energy, and that is insectoid. And that is because, as I talked about, there's a lot of machines in the fourth dimension, or the fourth density. A density is what comes from energy and organic forms working together. That creates a density. That creates a kind of denseness which vibrates with the organic forms that lives there. And that is why we run on electromagnetic, because that is enabling all of the machines from the fourth density to operate into our third. And that's also why the human vessel you have is created on electromagnetic energy, because it's literally being controlled by machines from the fourth dimension and fourth density. And this is why you are not supposed to freak out, because it's much more advanced than robots or anything, because these are not robots. These are highly engineered, genetically engineered, semi-organic alien technology. And it's not AI, because it's not developing consciousness, but it is able to work and detect consciousness. So that's the difference. But back to the residing races and the visiting races. So the aliens that has been worked with from the military, and what you've got disclosed out there, and what many people are working with, are the visitors. And these are the ones that come in their crafts. And they come in using what is called code streams. And I know this is computer language, but again, remember that our reality is being more and more computerized, and that goes with the collective consciousness field of the human mind, using more and more technology, sitting in front of a screen a lot of hours every day, linking their brain more and more up to the interface of their computer or iPad or iPhone, and in that literally changing their brainwave structure into becoming affectable by the HTML coding that is going on in the screen, literally linking the human brain up to interface systems with computers, which is the first step into linking it fully up to some of the technology that actually exists in the fourth density. And this is not transhumanism, it is part of it. There are some races out there, visitors, who use what we could call technology inserted into the human vessel in the fourth density version of you, because your body goes from the third dimension and actually has an energy system that goes into the other dimensions, but you're not using it. And the reason why you're not using it is because of the technology that typically is inserted into your full holographic energy system, which is actually called, that is behind the mammal vessel. And I was talking about some of the visitors, some of the races outside. They are coming in and using this human vessel for reasons and purposes and short periods of time, and inserting a lot of what we would call transhuman technology, typically on the left side, making you look like a half Borg, which is interesting. And I will return to that in a later video about movies and how that information sometimes corresponds to what's actually going on there. But the visitors and the residing aliens. The visitors come in their craft. They come in what's called code stream. Code streams are kind of access points from the fourth density and into the third. They use these code streams as a kind of, code streams are literally, like you use it in computer language, it's sequences of codes that they can use from the fourth density into the third by traveling on them. And these code streams enable their craft to shift from the fourth through the quantum bridge and into the third. And the quantum bridge enables these craft to shift from one dimension, one density, to another. That's the quantum level. That is where you kind of get everything. They kind of get it's a little bit about beam me up, Scotty, because when you go from one dimension to another through the quantum bridge on this system, you go from true energy, which is dimensional energy, and into electromagnetic, and you have to kind of quantum tunnel, quantum shift, and in that you are capable of shifting your craft from a fourth density craft and into a third density craft. And that is why they can navigate and do weird stuff here, because they are per definition fourth density crafts, or fifth sometimes, all depending on how high they are up, because that's actually our atmosphere is actually the dimensional band where you can come in using the code streams. That's part of the construction. So the very high leveled up in our ionosphere is actually the sixth density. And that's why we're going to cold space, because that we have no access to whatsoever right now. But the moment we get our sixth density vision back, we can see from our ground what's actually going on in the universe, and then it will stop being a black universe, and it would actually transform into what it actually is. And then you've got the fifth density, which is the access point. The fifth density is not positioned there, but it bridges into it. Got the fourth density, and then you got the third density. And for instance, chemtrails, the alien ones that are put here, there are two types. There are the private contractors doing weather modification, cloud seeding, which has been going on since the Second World War, sometimes even before. And then you got the chemtrails that are kind of part of some of the alien projects that are going on here from some very primitive races. But that type of dumping of chemical waste alters the third density, bridging into the fourth. And that sometimes, I'm still not sure if it's preventing some races from coming in, or if it's actually cloaking these races coming in. And I would typically go with the cloaking, because when they create this very heavy shielding of clouds, that typically goes with a lot of visitors coming in using these code streams, and they are positioning their crafts in what is the frequency band of the fourth density in our sky. So that's why they typically use this cloud covering, so they can come in and do whatever they need to do in that frequency band of our reality. So the visitors are the ones that come in with their craft and have their original vessel. And I'm getting a lot of back pain talking about this, so I'm giving some level information here which is not fully accepted, but I will give it anyways. So, and that also makes me kind of a little bit kind of short. My breath is difficult, kind of, because they are pressuring me energetically, giving me warnings. That is kind of a stunning, electromagnetic stunning on my heart, saying, not okay, not okay, not okay. And at the same time, I get in who is doing this. So I won't talk much about the visitors. This is a specific faction that is very, very scared that I will reveal what they're doing here, and I will not do so because I'm not interested in literally starting wars with these races. It will take 2 seconds if I continue, and they will manifest in my living room and literally give me a physical warning. They're just now stunning me electrically. So that is one of the the ways they use the fourth dimensional type of technology, the fourth density technology. Okay, and if you were they're different, they can also do it kind of literally just connecting to your field, and in that affecting your heart, and that's just a warning. So I'm accepting the warning, and I won't talk more about these visitors coming in, but I can say that the warning I'm getting here is because there are a lot of things going on right now. You have had a lot of things going on in England as well, and there are a lot of emotions being stirred up because of this. And that sets a specific frequency in the collective field of the third density, and that allows them to bridge in to some specific frequency bands that goes between our dimension and the fifth, and that enables from some races there to come in and visit. And now I'm really getting warnings. Now I get goosebumps all over, so I will stop talking about that. But that's actually what's going on. They don't want me to reveal this, and they know I'm a little bit of I'm very talkative because of what I feel is important for you to get of information. So I will not point my direction at that. And yeah, no, it's blue sky outside, but since they go up so high, they will not be visible to the naked eye. because when these craft are so high, they become so minuscule for the eye that you will literally not see them. Sometimes when you're on the sky, just see a ball of light. That's from the 5th density layer, the entrance point, and they just look like light. Whereas if they're from the 4th, you will see them as the android gray crafts. They're called jolts. And the reason why they're called jolts is because they can run on 3rd dimensional energy as well as 4th. So, and they can actually also be used in wars where they emit a kind of electromagnetic impulse, stunning, jolting the city or whatever they're going in. They can also be used in taking out the electromagnetic grid on this planet. And they are also upholding what is called the frequency fence. Okay, so that was a little bit. The visitors, you know of them, they were very prominent here in the 60s, 50s, 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s. And in the 90s, only few visitors kept coming here due to some of the actions of the human military. And I'm here particularly talking about the American military. But they were collaborating with the Russians and the Japanese. And has been since Second World War, where the outer factions of the world were warring each other. The secret military teamed up with some of these aliens and began, because of the Aldebaran threat through Hitler, which was actually a war that began the whole kind of negative alien invasion here. All depending on what you find a negative alien, but let's just put it that way. Beforehand, we had all of the residing races here, and they had divided this reality into different jurisdictions, and in that divided the human population amongst themselves for their different projects here, and I will return to that in a later video. These are what we typically call the clans, or the bloodlines, or the elite. These are the residing aliens that have lived here for thousands of years, if not more. And then during Second World War, we had the visitors that began coming in. And these are the ones from other systems that definitely do not belong here, that are literally just coming in using these code streams and these different entrance points, creating connection points into the density code streams or the code layers where they can bridge into this reality, and from that actually land their craft somewhere and then go up and visit whoever they wanted to visit at the time. And that was made possible because of the crafts that Hitler's team found out. I think some of the first were found in Egypt, probably some level somewhere in Africa as well. And because of that, and the connection, because of that finding, surfacing and retrieval of these crafts, the secret the governmental organizations in the Second World War were formed. And they were formed as a kind of, because the spies in Germany got to know this information, so they traveled back and told it to the American military, and the military then literally took connection to the Japanese and to the Russians and the Chinese, which didn't go so well, and other systems. And in that, the whole secret program of, okay, we're going to have some issues with these old crafts because that's a proof of and forthcoming or upcoming alien invasion, which would probably be instigated by Hitler or something. I don't know what they thought, but somewhere down the line that thought. And they began looking for the crafts in their own countries. And in that kind of dug up quite a lot of these old crafts with a lot of ancient type of alien forms. And from that began the genetic experiments, which has led to the current human vessel, which we have now, which are a hybrid of the original Pleiadian Syrian program, and slightly reptilian actually, and because the Syrians are also the reptilians, that's a version of them, and then and the Pleiadians as well. Some of the reptilians are actually also Pleiadians, but that's because they got these genetics inserted. And I see the genetic lineage. That's what I'm seeing. I'm not seeing the surface of them. I'm seeing what they're composed of. And that began some of the genetic experiments, as I said, with some of the family members to begin with, and indigenous people and these kind of things from the military. And that was done because of the incoming threat of the visitors. And the military at that time in space, so to speak, didn't know of the residing races. That came later on, because the more they experimented with this alien genetics from the corpses, which literally has created a lot of problems in our energy systems today, which are some of the things we will deal with and have to deal with, because that gives a lot of genetic mix-up in the consciousness structure when we begin developing that, because we got all of this, excuse my language, dead genetics inserted into us from different races that does not belong there. The 12-stranded template, that's a lot of alien genetics that are put in there that does not belong there and does not work well when you begin fire up your consciousness ability, working with the dimensional energy in the 4th dimension and up. So that's some of the issues we're struggling with, the military projects, as I call them. But actually it's more or less implemented to large parts of the human population. Anyway, that was a little bit of a sidetrack. So the military projects were kind of focusing on the visitors that would come, because if these crafts were there from one time, then they were destined to come back. And that opened up to the work with some of the CETAs who came in. And I don't know who invited them or how they came in. They probably came in because that the Americans, kind of the Aldebarans, I don't know, from that system, from the craft that the Germans found, I don't know. One of these military factions found a CETA craft, and in working with that dead body and inserting it into a functional human body, beginning to fire up that alien DNA. That alien DNA sent out a beacon into the space, and that opened up the doors for the CETAs to come in here. So the visitor problem we have had since Second World War, and that's why some of the races that came in the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s were coming here to try to solve the problem of the military projects, and the dead DNA of the ancient races of these newer versions, the ancient Pleiadian, the ancient Orion, the ancient Syrian, or whatever, the Draconian, which is a very bad strand, got that one inserted into the military projects, and that fired up and began opening up to these systems where the genetics came from, because genetics are a kind of energetic composition that fires off energy and consciousness across dimensions, and it begins to call in similar consciousness. And that means that the moment these military factions began operating with this, they messed around with the status quo of the Pleiadian Syrian project, and in that these races began coming in as visitors. I know you have seen on old carvings in caves or paintings in caves, different alien grey, the android grey, but that's because they began from the 50s time traveling back, and in that messing around with the original ape human project, which is the ape human project is the mammal project. That's the one under the Syrians and the Pleiadians trying to create a new form from where they could continue their evolution as mammals. So that messed a lot around with the genetic strand of the original ape human project, and it has now become quite a mix-up of different races, which are some of the issues we will learn to work with when we do the activation, which means we begin to activate our ability to work with dimensional energy, and in that actually work with the different type of genetics that have been added in, spliced in literally to the 4 code sequences of the mammal DNA. So that's a problem, that's the overlay genetics. So that is where we kind of got some of the problems we have today, because some of the crafts that the military found were shut down in some very ancient wars we had here, going back to the Orion Wars. And sorry to say, when you have a genetic and you fire it up and it comes back to life, that opens up to the time frame and the realities it came from. So the Orion Wars were not here to begin with, but because of the use of the Draconian, which are kind of warrior race from the Orion system, some really shit warriors, and their crafts were shut down here. That brought in the wars from Orion, and some of the galactic wars were literally pulled back in from history, literally revived from their pockets of other dimensional history settings, because time is not linear. It's as long as there's genetics remembering stuff, then that reality exists. So sometimes it's a good idea to forget, so we don't remember this. But because of the things the military did, they messed around with some of these code streams and timelines, if you prefer calling it that, and reviving some very nasty things out there. So what the military was afraid of would come in, and in their energetic splicing, which they learned from the C-test, and they didn't do a pretty good job, I would say. And some of the alliances that was working with the C-test, the Negative Alien Alliance, we literally opened up to some wars that are coming our way, and they have been peeking in from time to time. We had some huge wars in the Middle Ages that actually came after the military began messing around with the alien DNA. So they were not there to begin with. But when you mess around with things in one time frame, it affects the other ones. So that's again where I say history becomes a little bit complicated. So our past can actually be changed overnight. If we alter the programs or the DNA or whatever's going on here, we can change the past and the future, all depending on the level of consciousness we're able to work on. So that's why some of the visitors came here, and that stopped in the 90s, because at that time the negative alien agenda under the C-test and their races that they are working with, I don't know many of them yet, because I'm not beginning to look at it, because I'm kind of, don't really want to look at that thing, because some of these negative races that are part of these genetic constructions are extinct, should have been it, but if I begin looking at it and give you information about it, they will come back to life. And that is part of the CETA agenda and some of the programs they created here, and that's what they work with the military, because the CETA has told the military that these races were coming our way and they would attack the humans on this planet, where in fact they wanted the military to create vessels for these extinct races and their genetics, reviving them, because the CETAs are foul creatures and they are smelly and stinky and should not be talked or communicated with. They should literally be put in pocket and in stasis somewhere and isolated and never be talked about or remembered or anything. They totally deserve being totally forgot. I know this sounds hard, but I'm actually doing protection spell here. So I'm teaching you a little bit about protecting yourself. So that's some of the problem we have got with the visiting races. And that was instigated because of human stupidity, messing around with things they didn't know of, and the whole kind of male, sorry to say so, military dominance shit thinking that we better prepare ourselves from a future war, which actually created the possibility of that future war. So that's some of the other problems we're struggling with. Then we got the residing races, and the residing races are the ones that came in from, as I talked about in the previous video, allowance from the councils of this system to come in to try to solve some of their genetic issues in their own systems, where they were dying out, sending out excavations, or not excavation, what you called it, groups of their own race. And they came in here and they created a huge holographic construction, which is called the cube. It doesn't exist anymore, but it was called the cube, where they put their original bodies in stasis chambers, and then they integrated themselves into the human vessel in different forms and ways, sometimes full, sometimes only small degrees, sometimes by creating a little sack of genetics inside the human vessel. They could always retrieve it and out, or some of them actually positioning themselves in the fourth density and then only participating in the third dimension or third density by the sacks of genetics. These are the residing races. And these are the ones I have mostly worked with, because these are the ones that are communicating with me. And these are the ones we are solving a lot of problems with, because we have we have got shifts coming our way. As I talked about in the previous videos, these allowances and agreements for them to have their colonies here are ending. That's the huge cycle that is ending. They are not allowed to be here anymore, and they will be shipped back home. And some of them have got problems because whatever progression rate they thought they would have reached for their own civilizations, they have not achieved it. On the contrary, they have regressed even more, so they are kind of stuck there in the form that they have got now in the fourth density. And that is where some of them, instead of being human looking, have now literally regressed into look like crickets and mantids and the insectoid level, which is the level before totally decomposition and ceasing to exist. And they are using heavily the technology in the fourth density. And this technology is not something they brought in with them. This is actually technology that is left behind by the very first human civilization that existed here, the true humanist civilizations. So they've got access to some very, very advanced technology, which was actually created for good. And they have used it for their own lesser positive purposes. But that's only one faction of the colonizers that are here, the ones that are capable of operating with it. But most of it is actually working automatically and has done literally since it was created zillion years ago by the first very, very advanced human races, real human races, very tall human looking races, that beautiful looking, by the way, and no, not the giants and not this kind of foul looking organic thing. They were semi-organic, so they were able to shift in and out the third dimension, the fourth, and the third dimension at the time was something totally different. So this goes very, very far back. So this technology is not created for ill, but because of the colonizers and their regression and their lack of understanding of the greater whole, which is actually why they had issues in their own system to begin with, has become part of our system, and what we're actually struggling with when we begin talking about the whole disclosure. We have to discern between the residing races and the visiting races and what their agenda is, and we are having a lot of new incoming visiting races that are interested in taking over this reality field and this system, this solar system. The reality field is kind of with all the dimensions. The solar system itself is in the third dimension. Taking it over and begin recolonizing it, and in that bring back to life the different planets that are out there, which are actually not planets. They look like planets for now, but the moment they begin firing up, they will stop just having the third dimensional type of energy, and they will turn into that highly constructed, very, very technological, artificially constructed holographic realities going into the different dimensions, which any terrestrial system is actually created of. That's totally normal. That's how it's done. I know this sounds very science fiction like, but this is how I understand things by talking to the residing races, and I'm beginning to talk to the visitors as well, because in my work and how I work with the mammal template and clearing up the genetic mix and the issues we got there, I work with the fourth dimensional military, which are ex-humans, mammals like you and me, but because of their inserted alien genetics, they are now existing in the fourth density, and they exist in pockets there and they have found a way to negotiate with some of the aliens that are living there as well. So we have got our race enhanced and activated in the fourth density as well. So that's part of what is called the military today from my perspective. The original third dimensional military of the old programs, they are more or less long gone, or they have been wiped clean so they won't remember, or their memories have been distorted to only hold few stories which you have heard of. And it's out there as part of the whistleblower movement and these kind of things. So we are getting new visitors coming in. The old ones we knew of, the Pleiadians, the Nordics, and the Orions, or whatever, some of them are still there, but they have changed as well because they are not allowed to be in this system anymore, so they are shifting out, and they are in the process of doing so. quite a lot of what we know as the elite and the bloodlines, the aliens that colonized and took on some very high positions inside this reality, controlling the third and the fourth dimension or densities, have left as well, because they are forced to. They are not allowed to be here anymore. There is always a kind of contract or agreement on how to use genetic libraries. And if they don't reach a certain progression rate, which means they're using the library correctly, following the rules and laws of the genetics and the principles of that universe, they are expelled after a certain date. And we reached that in 16 and now in 17. And from that moment on, that opens up to some new possibilities for our races on this planet. So that means a lot of what used to be here and what you have been taught since 2000 and sometimes back to the 80s are slightly outdated. It's good historical information. Some of these visitors in the 80s and 90s might come back, but it's still kind of outdated information. And it's kind of lacking the whole residing alien faction of it, which are the ones that I'm talking to and working with and trying to figure out solutions of how we will do a joint evolution, because some of them are stuck here and they have to go into the physical form in full as part of the agreements, let's put it the other way around. Because they haven't reached their progression rate, they literally can't leave our reality field. They're stuck here. So they have to find solutions. And that's some of the things I'm communicating with. And I know this sounds very strange. And it is. But I've been working with it for over 10 years now. So I'm kind of getting very used to it. So that's why it's so natural for me. And if I'm not totally wrong, somewhere around 2000, at least 35, then it will be quite common to understand that a human soul can be much more than just the one you have been acquainted with so far, the controlled inner human. The inner human of the physical vessel can actually be an inner humanoid, an inner cricket, or an inner avian, or an inner Syrian, or a Pleiadian, or whatever. And you already kind of peeked into it, some of you, looking into the things that came out in 2000s, where there was a heavy input from the Syrian races trying to make people accept this possibility. And at the same time making people do a lot of energy work that would enable them to go in and integrate themselves, but that didn't go so well. So instead of integrating themselves, they actually pulled out quite a lot of the genetics they had inserted, and in that emptied out and drained the possibility for these humans to actually begin working with the dimensional consciousness they were promised that they were supposed to work with by doing these exercises. But that's how it goes. That's very typical Syrian, by the way. They trick. So they manipulate to get what they want, doing a lot of nice promises. And they always promise ascension. And they always promise upgrade. And they always promise a lot of things. But if you look back historically to all the things you have been promised from the Ascended Masters and the Galactic Federation of Light and all of these factions, which the Syrians mixed with other races, then you will discover that what they have promised has actually not come to be, and there's always a lot of good explanations why that is not possible. So, and that is because they are more working for their own interest than for activating the humans they are using to support their own agenda and their own evolutions. Because these races have got the idea that they are superior, and they got this idea that they are masters. That's why they call themselves the Masters of Light and Ascended Masters, because they think they are masters and superior of the human, and in that become their teachers, and in that teach that human that what that human is supposed to do, so they can link up and get the energy from their apprentices. So that is what is actually going on from a master level from the Syrians. And that was part of some of the projects the Syrians instigated here with the Pleiadians that was supposed to teach the Syrians a little bit of humility and a little bit of what is called service to others. And that is also why some of the ascended masters are talking a lot about love and light and the whole giving over and the whole accepting that it's not about being sovereign and ascended, but actually about helping others, because that is what they came here to learn, and they have had great difficulties with it. So that is part of some of their developmental programs they ran here with the mammal vessel, and that is part of some of the esoteric teachings, and that's why you get that vibe, because that is to control sorry, and develop the Syrian genetics into a more kind version. So that's their program that's actually running behind that one. And they did manage well. So, but again, they're crossbreeds and breeds, and that means that some of these different programs to develop inside the human vessel, linked up fully or partially or as part of it. When you go to the esoteric teachings of Bailey and Blavatsky, they talk about the races that call themselves Sanat Kumara, and they're partly Nagas, which means that they're partly snakes. And that's why they work a lot with the serpent energy and these kind of things, and the Kundalini and all these kind of things, because that goes with some of the issues they had in their races and back home in their own system. And they use the human vessel, the mammal vessel, for that purpose, to try and teach themselves a different type of behavior and learn to control that serpent energy, which is a kind of very difficult energy when you first begin inviting it in, and that's why they call themselves flame lords, and that actually gives a lot of issues which they were struggling with on Venus, which is where these Syrians come from. So I'm just, and you say, where do you get this information from? And just kind of, what is that? That is from communicating with them. So, but that's the residing races. I'm not working much with the visitors, but my best guess is that I'm jumping into that, because since the residing races are more or less leaving, and we are trying to figure out the ones that are here, left here, how to to continue this. And there will probably won't be long. I already encountered some of them. In some information from them as well, but I know for certainty they're coming in because they want to take this over, and some of them are pleading the right to use their ancestral contracts with the former races. And the fact is, from the council levels of the library, this genetic library, that is not okay. So they are actually coming in on false contracts and trying to claim something that is not theirs. So that is also some of the issues we're dealing with here on this planet. And I know there's a lot of humans like me who's working with this on this level, talking with all of these different races and trying to solve this on the behalf of humanity that does not know of it, and on the behalf of the residing races. And I am predominantly working with the very old races that are here. So my work is very narrowed down to a few group of races, which typically are the Syrians, the Orions, the Pleiadians, and the Arcturians. Or to put it in a genetic level, the insectoid, the avian, the reptoid, and the mammal, and the different combinations of this. So that is my main work with the residing races that are here and solving some of their issues. So those of us who are doing this work, we got different ways of working with this. And since quite a lot of the issues that had been here or have been here since 2000 and up until 2012 and into 2016 are kind of solved now, I don't see much point in trying to talk about some of the programs that ran and some of the harvesting that was going on. There's still harvesting going on, but these have to be reviewed from a different level. But that is something I talk about in the other channel, where I kind of go up very high and technical, but things are shifting pretty quickly now because of the destruction of the cube. And the cube had a lot of the stasis vessels from these ancient races, and the reason why they were harvesting so severely from humans were actually to get juice or energy for these bodies to revive them so they could leave and go back to their own system. But the destruction of the cube kind of put an end to that. So that would hopefully also end the severe harvesting that's been going on up till now. But the harvesting is also part of some of these ancient races, they literally cannot sustain themselves, so they're using our reality to do so, and that is for another video. Okay, take care.